Good evening and welcome to another episode of Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I am DM Bloodworth, and as you can see by the graphics, tonight I'm going to be talking about Bushido RPG and a one-shot session that I had run yesterday with a player JM, and JM is a subscriber to my channel, and a couple of weeks ago he had uh, he had responded on my Bushido video, which was a couple of months ago. He had inquired about actually walking him through a combat session because the combat is a bit crunchy in this game, and it's very much a game of its time, which in 1981 when this game was released, and I have the original copies here. Um, that was kind of the trend of some of these games during that time. AD&D had come out and was obviously much crunchier than uh, than D&D was. Games like Rollmaster had come out around that same time, and these game systems did have a lot of depth in them, and so it was really a great experience yesterday to spend the time and go through a game system that I really hadn't played in probably 35 plus years. And so the return was really you know was really fulfilling for myself as a as a game player and just as a GM to come back to an older system. It was a great deal of fun. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just focus on our experience yesterday and just the game mechanics that came up the most during it, and it really opened my eyes to one of the game mechanics that I didn't recall it being this important or this effective in combat. So I'm going to jump to that really quick, and we will switch views to, let's go here. So JM provided me his character sheet, and I took a look at it overall. The adventure that we did, and I'll show you a glimpse of that as well. The adventure that we ran was an adventure that I had written, and I had written it for 3 to 5 players. Although only JM was able to show up, and so I just had to modify it as we ran through. I gave him a couple of henchmen, kind of to help him out along the way if need be, and and I toned down the combat that he was going to encounter. But so here is his character sheet, and he typed this up himself. It's really pretty comprehensive how much he included in here, and so you can see, stats wise, he had a 15 strength, which is actually pretty high. So that was good, and it helped him out in that some of his some of the combat that he did get involved with really required some of these stats. He didn't have he didn't have a terrible chance of getting hits in combat. Not the greatest of chance, but still not terrible. About 55% or an 11 on a D20 is what his target roll generally was. So and his health, he had 30 hit points, which really came in handy for him as well. So he had a very high health, a health of 20. But here's the attributes: strength, deftness, speed, health, wit, and will. He had to do quite a lot of wit rolls, which he was kind of nervous about. It was like, you know what, it's not the greatest, but it's still a 50-50 chance. But he was a little bit nervous about it. We had some fun with it as well. Fortunately, whenever he had to whenever he had to try to convince somebody of something, they had to make a wit saving throw as well. And it just seems that everybody in the system were not as sharp as might have been useful. So anyway, the key for him though was jujitsu. All right, and so you can see here, he has some basic scores. His jujitsu speed of a base of an 11, and that became his combat of choice during this, even though he was ultimately facing a a samurai warrior as well as that samurai's retainers. So it really did help him, a great deal in the combat, and I'll go over that very briefly as well. So because we were kind of playing rules light and such, and I had to tone everything down. Instead of using the pre-gen samurai that I was going to use, I just went with you know the um, the common man build for a bushi, which is a samurai, or any of those professional categories of warrior class individuals. He was a budoka, so he had some combat skill as well. And so this is what he was facing against was a samurai, and then his four common man retainers, which were civilians. So they were, obviously much weaker than everyone else. But he was going to encounter more than one at one time, and so the combat did turn out to be somewhat challenging. Very briefly, I mean, I went through one combat where he had basically two assistants, and that's the samurai. The samurai had two assistants, and the player character had four assistants. And as they went into combat, the samurai had managed to kill, two of his henchmen, two of the player character's henchmen, and nearly a third before his two henchmen were killed off, and eventually the samurai was subdued and then executed. So, how this went about is what I'm going to get into. I am going to switch views here, and we're going to go. So, the adventure that we were running is called the Pheasant, and this is an adventure that I had written myself, but it was very strongly inspired by a scene in a TV series Shogun from approximately that same time period, early 1980s, where a samurai warrior executes a civilian who is in high regard in this village. And then I just took that, and it was over a pheasant that the civilian farmer had taken down, that the samurai warrior had hung for it to cure. And since the farmer found that to be repulsive, he took it down, even though he knew that it was going to cost him his life. And so the player character, or player characters as it was originally designed, was a member of the Yakuza. And the Yakuza was the real power and protection of this small town. And so this outside samurai, a Ronin, had come in and, killed this individual. And so they wanted to exact revenge on him. Now, they didn't want to kill the samurai in the village itself, because that would attract, the attention from the ruling powers. But they certainly wanted to eliminate and exact revenge on the samurai. So the plan was to slowly whittle down the samurai's retainers, because he originally had 4 retainers, and they slowly went through. And I'm just scrolling through the adventure here. They execute their plan, and it was several phases of this plan. And in the first encounter, the player character actually never got involved in direct combat. He was just there to witness how the plan was being devised. And one of the retainers was killed in that, and then he had to set up the stage for the next phase, and that was to go out there and exact revenge along with the samurai or the samurai's other retainers, to go out there and exact revenge for the death of the retainer. And in phase 2, when the player character went out there with one of the retainers, they did have to get involved in the combat, and that was the player's first experience with the combat. And the combat that he really relied on, I'm going to switch here, was his jujitsu. So jujitsu is an unarmed combat system allowing the user to make a grapple, a throw, and trip attacks. All right, and once he was able to grapple, we started looking down here. So this is the first thing that the player tried to do was, once you grapple, you can maintain the situation. This holds the target helpless until the attacker releases him. You can attempt a choke, which is what the player tried to do, which required the attacker to make a new jiu-jitsu roll using his raw BCS, and that with no modifiers. And if he's successful, he can render the target unconscious. So it really does take 2 successful rolls, one with his modifiers and then one without, in order to render the target unconscious. If he fails these rolls, the target has broken, obviously, the hold, and he has to restart over again. So the player character was not successful in applying the chokehold on this retainer. The retainer broke free, and then the other 2 henchmen that were assisting the player character had jumped in and basically killed that retainer with their bow stabs. And then they had to set up the scene that this guy was also killed while they were hunting for these pack of wild dogs that was supposedly the real culprits behind killing these retainers. And the player character had to then relay this message to the Ronin and convince this Ronin to go to the capital city to get further assistance in hunting down what was going on here. And so it kind of worked out that way, where the samurai agreed to leave the village with an escort, but unbeknownst to the player at the time, the escort or the samurai kind of knew that he was being set up. I'm going to switch views here again. So he kind of knew he was being set up. So when the player and his two henchmen decided to turn on the samurai and his remaining retainers, the samurai was not taken by surprise. And in the very first combat round, the samurai had drawn his weapon and immediately, with just one stroke, killed one of the henchmen outright. It was like boom, dead. So the player was like, "Oh my gosh, this is really, this is really, really brutal how fast it just happened." But then he applied his jujitsu, and he was successful with his first roll, and he got a hold of the samurai, and he did he held him. He did not apply the choke for the second round, so the samurai was able to break away. The samurai then hit the player character with his first strike, but like I said, the player character was pretty tough. A lot of hit points. Though he did take a good deal of damage that first hit. I believe he took 6 points of damage from that first sword strike, and then he went to apply his jujitsu again, and meanwhile the group of henchmen and the retainers are fighting each other, slowly working each other down as well. And one of the retainers kept on trying to help the player against the samurai. So the samurai then countered and nearly killed one of the other henchmen, and then the player got him under a hold a second time. A second time, the samurai had broken the hold, attacked the player, and reduced the player to did another 8 points of damage to the player. So now the player, JM is getting a little bit nervous. He was like, geez, this guy is, one of his other henchmen got killed at the same time. Still, the other two retainers were still alive and still fighting at this point. So he started getting nervous. I could tell he was starting to get nervous, and it was like, this might turn out really bad, but he didn't want to stop the jujitsu because he knew that with his bow staff, he was going to be less effective. Finally, he went for another jujitsu attack, and this time, and I'm going to, switch once again. This time, he went for a takedown. So a takedown they describe up over here. All right, so, well, actually, I lost space of it. So he did, I'm missing it right now. Oh, here it is. User elects a takedown option of the throw attack and is successful. He is allowed to immediately perform a grapple attack. This does not require waiting until the next available action. So he went for a takedown. However, he got a special effect from the takedown. When we rolled for that special effect, his special effect of the takedown basically disabled one of the samurai's legs. And at that point, it was all over with. So at that very point, the samurai was down on one knee. He could no longer effectively fight. So he was at minuses. The player had a better chance now, a higher chance of scoring hits on him. And so when he grappled him, finally again trying to put him under the chokehold, he managed to grab him. The second round, he managed to choke him to the point that the samurai fell unconscious. In the meantime, his henchman finally turned tide against the remaining retainer who was finally killed. And then the three of them, the player character, the two surviving henchmen of the player character, managed to finish off the samurai. So it really was an exciting piece of combat. It lasted about 6 rounds, maybe a little bit longer than 6 rounds. Same, but certainly directly with the samurai, it lasted 6 rounds, and the experience was really enjoyable because both of us, we learned a lot from it. Like I said, since I've been so rusty on the system and not actually playing it through and seeing how it worked, we had a great deal of fun. And so I'm hoping that we'll certainly come back to this and play this some more, as well as think about some other ways that we can take this game system and not simply modernize it, but just streamline it a little bit, because it is a very cumbersome system, but it is just filled with so much depth that is like historic in a sense, where you get the real sense of this as a historical setting, and the combat is that much lore based in this system. But like I said, it could use some tweaks and make it a little bit simpler to and smoother to run through. But but it was a great experience, and if you've never played this game, and you can still get this game on through Fantasy Games Unlimited. You can get an updated copy of it, so you can still get it in softcover. I forget how much I paid for the box set. Probably under $50, but I will link that video box opening of the set that I actually have on the end of this video as well. So once again, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing. If you have any requests for games that you would like for me to look at, or if there are any games that I've already done that you want a more in-depth look at, please, leave a comment in there and ask. As you can see, I really enjoy helping new players out and learning some of these older systems. And yeah, just drop me a line, and we'll set up some time that we can get together, virtual, on a virtual gaming session, and I'll walk you through it. So it was a great experience. I hope JM. Well, I know JM. He really expressed that he really enjoyed it, and I can't wait to play with him again in this game. And hopefully we get a few more people involved with this as well. So once again, I appreciate that you're here. I look forward to seeing you on a gaming screen sometime soon, and just be safe out there during these times, and keep on gaming. So you all have a great evening. Take care.